What are you expecting at this stage of a relationship? Learn to have the vulnerable conversations. Hey, how are your needs being met this week? How are you feeling about the relationship this week? Check in, take inventory, see where you're at, recollect yourselves, and reconnect after this sort of honeymoon phase of the relationship where you're on this high. You can think of it as like if you go out and you drink 2 bottles of wine with your partner on, a Saturday evening on vacation. And then, you the next day you're gonna feel it. You're gonna feel a little hungover. You have the natural come down, and it's during that time you want to check in with each other, be gentle to each other, compassionate, see what's going on. You might be both a little irritated and cranky, or if you didn't sleep much, or whatever it is. But you have to nurture and be careful and nurturing essentially of each other during this stage of a relationship. This is also a very important time to work on and through your core wounds. Like, your relationship at this point is here for emotional evolution. And this is a very beautiful time in a lot of ways, because your relationship will really show you the wounded elements of yourself. I was speaking to somebody not that long ago who had a huge abandonment wound with her father. And sure enough, she looked at her patterns and she always got stuck in the power struggle stage. She always ended up not having it work out. She was very anxious. It never worked out with her partner. She kept having this pattern of being left, and she finally realized that it was because she kept getting to the power struggle stage, her fears of abandonment becoming, sky high, and not having healthy coping mechanisms and strategies, because she hadn't worked through her own wounds and her own stories about herself and her own self-esteem and speaking up and setting boundaries. And so as a result, she kept getting into relationships with emotionally unavailable men who represented her father in a sense. And because of this, she kept getting hitting these walls of pain and frustration. And she kept feeling like, okay, it doesn't work out for me in the end. What's wrong with me? And it wasn't anything wrong with her inherently. It was something wrong with her coping mechanisms and adaptations because of the fear of abandonment. And think about it, like, if I deeply fear abandonment and then I don't show up as myself, or I'm inauthentic, or I'm always people pleasing, or I just contort my personality into whatever I think you expect from me, I'm not giving you anything real and tangible to connect with, and I'm not showing up truly, and you don't sense my truth and my nature and my personality, and so we're still only connecting superficially, which means I'm actually, by doing that, my coping mechanism to avoid abandonment is actually indirectly increasing my chances of being abandoned. So we just want to be really clear about how we're showing up in this phase and really work through these core wounds. And there's sort of a general rule, like whatever patterns or problematic situations we have in the relationships to our parents, who were our primary attachment figures at one point, whatever we didn't work out there, we are going to bring into our romantic relationships. And whatever we don't work out there, if we even just stay in the relationship, like let's say we get married in the honeymoon phase and we're in the power struggle stage, and literally I've seen many couples who have stayed in the power struggle stage their entire marriage for 20 years, and those unresolved emotional problems get passed right down into the relationship with the children. So it's just important to recognize too, like, we're here to work these things out, and what we don't, trauma basically gets passed down. So look inwards at the triggers and do the work on the meaning you're giving to situations, questioning your stories, and reprogramming those core wounds, like I teach in the original Anxious Attachment Style course and the Emotional Mastery course. So these are some really important lessons, and this phase is also about you integrating your sense of self. So when we're in the honeymoon phase, it's like, oh, we're so into that person and they're so into us, and we sort of have that superficiality in us at times, because we always get all dressed up to go out for the dates, and we always are careful about saying the right thing, and we try to be impressive. And really the power struggle phase is this call to us to be able to integrate our true self into the relationship. And that can be painful and a little bit rocky at times, but it's there for you to be able to move into the stability and commitment and bliss stages of a relationship, so that you can have your full sense of self and love somebody's full sense of self, truly and deeply in the relationship itself. So Another couple of lessons in here: regain your balance in the 7 areas of life. Wherever you are imbalanced, relationships will magnify your insecurities in this area. Let's say, for example, you're not empowered in social relationships. Chances are you're going to have some kind of triggering experience where your partner suddenly wants to go out all the time with their friends, and then you're left feeling excluded or left out or abandoned, or any other core wounds of the anxious preoccupied. And learning to meet your own needs and regain your self-identity again post-honeymoon phase, that you might have partially lost. And so this healthy interdependence is meant to develop in this stage. Now, another couple of patterns in the power struggle stage: anxiously attached individuals can be extremely critical when they misunderstand this stage and take things very personally. They can become even more preoccupied because of their fear of loss. It's like that they have all these feelings, the fear of loss goes up with the feelings, and then we enter into power struggle stage, and the person starts pulling away, which is now like, compounding the activation of this fear. And so sometimes they can be disrespectful of others' boundaries or invasive as a result, or become, critical, or make, contemptuous comments, and lose themselves and cling even more in this stage. And even though your impulsive, like that subconscious mind's impulse is going to be to cling, what you actually need to do to move out of this stage is let go, surrender, come back to your sense of self, start doing the work on yourself. And what you will see is that by you doing that and staying rooted in yourself and healthy communication and healthy boundaries, it actually starts resolving the problem. Okay, another couple patterns in here before we move into the tools are scorekeeping can become pretty prevalent at this stage. Like, I'm doing all this and you're not doing this, and sort of getting really intense into the scorekeeping, smothering, over planning, and sometimes not seeing your partner properly because you're seeing your partner through the filter of your expectations or projections, and you're not seeing them as a human being for what they're going through, what stage of the relationship they're in, what's triggering them. And so you start to see them through this story of expectations, how they should be or what they're not doing. And sometimes that actually deeply disconnects you from seeing them as a human being and leaving room for them to see you as a human being. And so a lot of miscommunication and misunderstanding can happen at this phase, which means communication and transparency are key. So in the next part of this module, we're going to go through some expectations, protest behaviors, and tools to move through these challenges. So the expectations that often come for the anxious preoccupied individual in this stage. Number one, that we should still be in the honeymoon phase. Often the anxious preoccupied experiences a lot of resistance and a lot of shoulding. Like, we should have been back here. We should be seeing each other 5 days a week or 7 days a week. We should. And not recognizing that this truly is a rite of passage in the life cycle of a relationship. And it's important to actually move through this stage in order to progress into the future stages. So one of the most important things you can do when you recognize the power struggle stage coming, or starting to become present, is to accept and work with it instead of resist and work against it. You will only keep it alive longer if you are in resistance to this process. The next thing is we can start having this expectation that my partner shouldn't be changing, shouldn't be wanting to spend less time together, shouldn't be having their own interests even. And in fact, this is the healthy thing. This is actually the beginning of healthy interdependence integrating. And healthy interdependence is necessary in order to progress to the commitment, stability, and bliss stages. The idea here is to still see each other regularly, but to recognize that regularly doesn't have to be all the time. And so usually the average shift that we'll see is that an individual starts dropping off how often they see you by 1 to 2 days per week during the power struggle stage, if you're not like living together or living very close to one another, or obviously doing long distance. And communication often drops off during this stage by about 20 to 25% before it's actually becoming unhealthy. And these are actually the signs of healthy integration, okay? Slight drop off, slight differences in somebody's own interest. And it doesn't mean that this is fun. And yes, you are losing like a little bit of that high and that spark. And and that sort of connection. But if you're having healthy conversations about this, if both you and your partner are aware, hey, we're in the power struggle stage, we have to move through it effectively. It's normal for a little bit of that high and that intense attraction to drop off a little bit. We are going to go through some neurochemical withdrawal. If you can make this conscious and have these discussions, you are going to move through this so much differently, because both of your minds won't be trying to fill in the blanks with why this is happening or why that's happening. And it will give you more room to actually move through this and feel like you're doing it together and collaboratively, like you're sort of climbing this mountain together and figuring it out. And so it's a beautiful way of just starting to take some of the pressure off as you're in this stage of the relationship. And it's really a huge necessity to move through this stage collectively if you want the relationship to last and to deeply connect. If we avoid, misunderstand, or try to sabotage the independence part of healthy interdependence, we only stay stuck in the power struggle stage for longer. You can think of it as like you have to pass the test to move on to the next level. Like, think of it as like you're in a classroom, and if you keep failing the test, you have to keep retaking it. And so you want to approach this with grace, with openness, receptivity, and a huge interest in learning. And so the sobering part is essentially us starting to also, if we give ourselves the opportunity, as both individuals sort of drop the mask, we both get to start seeing each other's true feelings, true needs, true expectations, desires, and then find a way to healthily integrate them into the wholeness, which is sort of the living organism of the relationship between you and this person. And we want to evaluate truly and deeply here, like, is this workable? Is this not? Are we both willing to make healthy compromises? Are we both willing to communicate transparently? Are we both willing to see each other's perspectives and validate each other's feelings? And these are the questions you want to be asking yourself. And your partner, and sometimes as loving as the anxious, preoccupied individual is, and as how much they can care deeply for another person, sometimes without meaning to, their fears can cause them to sort of put their partner into a box and sort of expect them unconsciously to be like the puppet that they want them to be. That this is our partner and they should be doing this. And the reality that we have to accept is that, these people in our relationships that we love, they are not ours, and we do not own them. What we're supposed to do is come together in a collaborative way to symbiotically benefit one another's lives. So, some of the protest behaviors and underlying fears in this stage, some of them are just basically magnifications of what's beginning at the end of the honeymoon phase. So the threatening to leave, but for very short periods of time without taking it too seriously, meanness or contempt, but then often the anxious preoccupied feels guilt and shame later and enters into this vicious cycle of then feeling guilt and shame and then over sacrificing and then being mean again, and all these different sorts of pieces. Trying to force the partner to change is very prevalent in the power struggle stage. This can be through convincing, criticizing, comparing, or just pushing and pressuring in sometimes an invasive way. And again, the moment that you're in this space, you are not seeing your partner for who they truly are. You're not accepting them. And this is one of the key ingredients to move through this phase, is acceptance. So if I can't accept you and I'm always trying to change you, the partner feels unseen, unheard, misunderstood, not valued for who they are, then it doesn't mean we don't make an effort to create a healthy connection and healthy dynamic and take each other into consideration. But there's a difference between healthy communication versus just directly trying to change another person. And again, some of these same patterns are magnified, pressuring the relationship. So are you going to see me or not? Are you going to commit or not to this? What are your plans? And sort of pushing. Disrespecting boundaries at times, seeking attention outside the relationship again can be more prevalent here, and then trying to control whereabouts of activities, and then some of that snooping, blaming, raising voice, or even emotionally dumping on the partner. These can all start to magnify. And again, these are trauma response coping mechanisms. When you are feeling extreme jealousy or extreme fear of abandonment and these things come out, it's not because you're this like bad person or you can't control yourself. That's your nervous system's trauma response, period. So you want to be aware of that, work with that, and start to understand that part of you and heal that part of you, and then also communicate that in a gentle and loving way without pressuring towards your partner. So both of you have context for what's going on, and you can start dealing with it at a conscious level instead of just through this reactive space of your nervous system and subconscious mind. So here are some really important tips and strategies to enter into this stage and move through it effectively. So number one, know that this is a difficult phase for anyone. Be patient and kind to yourself. Realize that this phase brings deep lessons, learning, and opportunities for deep inner healing and self-realization. Number 2, recognize that this stage is about vulnerability. It's for you to learn that your needs, the anxious preoccupied, are worthy of communicating and that your feelings do matter. So you might think in this stage that I can't communicate that I need to be validated sometimes, because what if I lose this person? If you're not giving yourself permission to have that need and communicate it in a gentle way, then you're probably going to stay in that phase longer, okay? Because you're going to feel more insecurity, have more protest behaviors, push the person away, and it's going to be a vicious cycle. So truly, you have to value yourself in this process. And if there's any space that you're not, it's going to keep you stuck longer. Next, it's important to work through your feelings first to avoid emotionally dumping on your partner. You want to communicate in a healthy way. So for example, there's a big difference between you saying, you don't care about me and you make me feel not cared about, versus, I realize, let's pretend it's like you have your partner who wants to go out with their friends and you don't have anything to do that evening, and you perceive it as you being excluded and not cared about. And so you go to this person and you say, you don't care about me, you excluded me. We don't give our partner anything to work with there. But if we say instead, hey, I realized this evening that when you go out with your friends, I have a bit of an exclusion wound that gets triggered. And I would love if you could just send me a text to validate me, or say hi, or send me some love at some point through the evening, so I feel safe and I feel included in your thoughts. If you can say, this is my experience and my reality. I feel that this wound gets triggered within me. It's not saying you made me feel this way. It's saying this is my experience because of something that pre-exists within me. And here's what I would love if you can do. By doing this and opening the dialogue that way, you start working on your vulnerability, and you also start working on being accountable for your own wounds while expressing your needs in a healthy manner, in a way that your partner can literally work with. And that's not too much to ask. And if you're finding that you're communicating in a healthy form without emotionally dumping and just saying, these are my feelings and they're your fault, if you're doing that consistently and you don't see movement, then you could be with somebody who's just unwilling and not a healthy partner. And in the power struggle phase, we're here to find this out. And so most of the time, we can really communicate through just about anything, but in very rare cases, people just aren't in the same stage of life for certain reasons. The other really important tools in this stage, work on questioning your stories. You've got your emotional processing sheet in this workbook. I'm sure you've taken the Anxious Preoccupied original course, and so you've got steps in your workbook to question your stories and equilibrate them, so that you are not getting lost in a space of thinking, oh my gosh, we entered into this phase and they pulled away, and then you misinterpret or misperceive the pulling away as meaning that you're not loved, you're not cared about, you're not good enough, and filling in the blanks with all these really painful stories. So you really want to work on questioning your stories and taking control of your thinking in this stage. This is one of the most important things you will learn to do, is in this stage itself. And this is also about bringing your sense of self into the relationship and integrating it. So finding yourself again if you've lost yourself earlier, okay? Other really important tips for this stage and strategies: please communicate directly. Research shows that when you communicate directly and your needs are met, the sense of neediness actually begins to dissipate. So if you feel this neediness and then you can communicate in a healthy form and then you get that need met, over time, not only are you creating a nice healthy set of grounds for yourself and your partner to move through things and communicating effectively, but you're also, through repetition and the emotional relief that you're creating, you're actually reprogramming any paradigms of neediness by doing this work. So it's very important, and it minimizes the chances that your partner can't meet your needs when you speak directly about your needs. Often, anxious, preoccupied individuals, I find, do not communicate their needs directly. They tend to get sort of lost at that part, because sometimes they feel unworthy of having their needs communicated and seen and heard. So practice not blaming and practice communicating directly, and recognize too, as another tip here, it's important to be accountable. So if somebody is not truly meeting your needs repeatedly, despite your kind and direct communication, you are also accountable for choosing a relationship that is right for you. Okay? Now, the last couple of tools I'm going to share here. Number 1, there's a beautiful exercise in the workbook that will help you to reparent your inner child. So those times when that like inner wound comes up of feeling very afraid, very flighty, very fearful of abandonment, this is often this traumatized space in your psyche that had a deeply unmet need in childhood that you're now trying to heal and get met through your partner. I highly recommend doing the reparenting course if you find that this is showing up for you quite often. And the last 3 tools here that are so important are, number 1, learning to share power in the relationship. The power struggle stage means, can we balance the power, okay, and work collectively? Learning to repair emotional disconnects and forgive effectively. It is so important to practice active forgiveness. If we are moving through this stage of a relationship and then we keep bringing things up from the past and throwing them in our partner's face, and maybe you don't mean to, or maybe you don't do this, and maybe your partner does it. It doesn't matter. If this is something that's taking place, if we keep bringing up the past, it means we haven't forgiven it fully. And in that case, we want to go into that and we want to do work on forgiveness and understanding why this is taking place and understanding what needs we have to get met now to help us move through the problem that we're not forgiving then. And in doing this, we'll be able to enter into the next stage of a relationship. And lastly, we want to practice as the anxious preoccupied, releasing fantasy-based thinking and the belief that people shouldn't make mistakes or other people should be perfect and serve or meet every need. The absolute truth of any relationship is that there will be moments where people disappoint you. There will be moments where people don't do or say the right thing or make a mistake or don't show up well. And that's okay. If it's pervasive and if it's all the time and if this person's causing way more pain than love and pleasure and connection in our lives, then it's time to leave. But if on the off chance, somebody makes a mistake here or there and then they work to recover it, we also want to work on accepting them and accepting their flaws. And this is really the essence at its core of the moving through the power struggle phase, is for us to start accepting our partner, seeing their flaws, choosing to love them anyways, while communicating our needs and showing up for ourselves simultaneously. So for exercise 6 here, this is our reminder tool that I always love to refer back to. It's all about questioning your stories. So the goal of this exercise is to question the stories you tell yourself when you notice negative emotions coming from a situation. Since emotions are always giving us feedback that we are giving painful meaning to events or we have unmet needs, it's crucial to become consciously aware of the cause and effect relationship of our thoughts and feelings. Learn to question the stories that may be untrue, and you can follow this up by defining your needs and creating supportive strategies to get them met. So let's just say, for example, you say, I was triggered the other day when someone showed up 15 minutes late to our date. Isolating the problem there, getting specific about the situation. Now, what did you believe about the person or event because of what happened? What meaning did you give to it? So maybe you gave it meaning. I made it mean I am not important to that person and I don't matter. I also made it mean that I'm not good enough. Okay? So we have the situation where you make it mean that, you're not important to that person. Maybe, maybe not. That may be a needs conversation. Hey, this is a boundary. This can't happen again. But when you're turning around and going, oh, I don't matter as a person, you're hurting yourself because of their actions. Or I'm not good enough because somebody showed up late. No, somebody else's actions don't get to define you at your core and your character. So this is where we really want to buckle down and do the work. So can you know with certainty that this is true? Okay, so can you know that you're not important to that person? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they were having a stressful day. Maybe they were really nervous, so they panicked and were thinking of not coming because they really like you and they were scared. Maybe, it could be a million and one things. We don't want to give meaning that diminishes our self-esteem. So, can you know 100%? And maybe you look and you go, well, I can't know for sure that I don't matter, that I'm not good enough, and that I'm not important. Okay, so no. Then we're looking for each one to oppose by questioning. So you may say, I am important. I do matter. Okay? And you can do so many different things here. You can target it from the perspective of the person. So I know I matter to that person because they talk to me on the phone for an hour every day. You may also say, I can't know 100% that they were late because they think I'm unimportant. It could be that they were stressed and stuck at work, afraid of losing their job, have people-pleasing tendencies in the workplace. It could be, and that's their programming. It could be that they were nervous, got lost en route. It could be so many different things. So you're seeing that it could be those different things. This doesn't mean you don't have a conversation and say, hey, it's really important for me that you're on time. That's a boundary for me. But it means that you're not necessarily assigning meaning if the person hasn't come out and showed or communicated directly and said, you are not important to me, right? And then you can look at how you are important in general. So to other people and to yourself. So I am important to, and you could make a list of people, including yourself, and why you matter to these people, how you matter. So you're not believing this, okay? So see, we targeted this specific situation with the person. Then we poked a hole in the idea itself being connected to the person or situation. Is there anything other than you being unimportant that could have been the reason that this took place? And then how you are important in general. Okay, so you would repeat this for I'm not good enough. Okay, how are you good enough? You can think of it this way: how am I good enough to the person? And you'd put this reason, this reason, this reason. How is this situation, them being late, not about me being enough? Okay, oh, well, because it could be this thing, this thing, this thing. And how am I good enough overall? Piece of proof, piece of proof, piece of proof. Okay, and that's you speaking using your conscious mind to speak in the language of your subconscious mind so you can deal with those wounds at the core root level where they exist. So let's talk about exercise 6, part 2. This is a mini reparenting exercise with different strategies to support you in doing this. So by completing this exercise and integrating new patterns into your daily life, you will begin to reprogram your subconscious mind, and you can also reparent yourself. This will allow you to reduce and eventually replace any negative patterns and associated behaviors from your life. So listen to the strategies in the course that are recommended for reparenting that were discussed in this course. And I want you to choose the top 5 behaviors that you want to work on. Beside each behavior, just write out how you will specifically apply the recommended reparenting strategies to your life. And really the idea of this is for you to be able to rinse and repeat this, act on this strategy on a daily basis, and through doing this, you literally are reprogramming. So let's look at the example of emotional repression. And let's say you decide, I want to work on repressing my emotions. So we're basically reparenting these unmet needs from our lives, and we're showing up to get the needs met. So all you would do here, if this was the example, is you would say, I want to stop repressing my emotions. And then you would say, the strategy to support this would be, and you can put a bunch of different things, but you want to pick things that you know you will action. I will journal about my feelings and needs each morning for 15 minutes and each evening for 15 minutes before bed. Okay, and then maybe you'll also say, I will check in with my feelings and needs throughout the day by setting an alarm each hour. When the alarm goes off, I will ask myself what I'm feeling and what I need to feel relief or to feel even better if I'm feeling good. Okay, so you're literally just putting strategies in here to support yourself in doing this. And this makes it actionable, it makes it clear, it's easily there in front of you, and you'll basically just rinse and repeat for the top 5 things. And then you can prioritize, right? Then you can get really, really clear. Which strategies do I want to action first in my life? What do I really want to focus in on? What needs the most reparenting and the most met needs that have been unmet for a long time? Or things I've been disconnected from in myself. And as you do this repetitively over the course of 21 days, you have new habits, new ways of treating yourself, new strategies that really help to end painful cycles from past experiences and imprints. We start talking about some of the power struggle stage protest behaviors. What we're looking at here is that a lot of the commonalities in the power struggle phase of a relationship for anxious preoccupied individuals are that the protest behaviors are a subconscious strategy that might have worked in childhood but will not work in your adult relationships. And something that's really important to note is that when we form these behavioral coping mechanisms to deal with traumatic events as children, often what happens is those things worked for us as children, so we patterned in these positive emotional associations to them. But then in our adult lives, these things are maybe no longer working, but we're running life through the old programs. Okay, so when something is programmed in, even if it's not working, unless there's a tremendous amount of pain associated with our coping mechanism to the point where like we are imprinted in the opposing direction, which often does not happen, then we're going to keep running these old programs that may actually be doing us a disservice relative to what needs we're trying to get met. If you imagine, for example, there was a child, and this is an example I'll often use, and growing up, they would get in trouble. Let's say they weren't getting attention from their caregivers, and so they would throw a temper tantrum. And when they threw a temper tantrum, the caregivers would come towards them and soothe them and be like, "It's okay, honey," maybe give them candy, give them a hug. Well, what do you think the child learns? The child learns to associate, when I throw a temper tantrum, good things happen. My needs get met. I get emotional connection. I even get rewarded. I get candy. And so now the child is programming in these positive emotional associations relative to that behavior. Now, especially when those things happen repetitively and they become strong programs within us, how do you think that person, unless they are doing inner work, how do you think they're going to behave in their adult lives when they're not getting their needs met? They're going to be the people who throw a temper tantrum. So now we have adults, let's pretend, for example, in a boardroom meeting, feeling unheard, not getting their needs met, and they throw a temper tantrum and yell at people in the meeting and stomp out, and it's like, well, that's going to do you a disservice. There's way more downsides to that than upsides in a person's adult life. But we might know that from a conscious perspective, but our subconscious mind still has the associated programs that get played out. So how does this apply to anxious preoccupied individuals? Well, what we see is that anxious preoccupied, they usually learn their strategy to soothe is to cling to others, to hold on tight to mom and dad or to caregivers of any kind, and to find ways to sort of charm them or express their fears and vulnerabilities, and then they get soothed. And in a person's adult life, we are rarely going to find people who reward that behavior, right? People are going to want us to have, as a general rule, because we're all wired in a similar way, a balance between attachment and authenticity, sense of self, autonomy. So we get into a dynamic where we can try to cling to people because it's an old program, just like the person throwing a temper tantrum in the boardroom meeting, because it's their old program, but it often has more downsides than upsides in a person's adult life. So the whole point when we talk about the power struggle phase is to recognize that, we can end up refeeding this cycle that we're actually trying to break out of, so that we can actually get our needs met with updated strategies that do work, as opposed to these outdated strategies that do end up making our worst fears become self-fulfilling prophecies. So what we're going to do is you're going to look really clearly here. on page 16, what are some of the protest behaviors that are common? We talk about them a lot in the Anxious Preoccupied course. What I want you to recognize is that as you take a look at all of these different protest behaviors, we first understood the roots in the previous exercises, and now we're gonna actually create a solution and then a commitment, because the commitment insinuates like a rinse and repeat type of thing, where we have repetition plus emotion to then actually program in these new strategies to get our needs met instead of these old things that are not serving us any longer. So if you take a look at the top of your page, I want you to take a moment and write out the protest behaviors, and the course is a good reference for this, by the way, but take a moment and write out the protest behaviors you find yourself enacting the most often in the power struggle phase of a relationship. And some really common ones, just to get the ball rolling for you, might be finding yourself testing somebody a lot in the power struggle relationship, like fake pushing them away to see what they'll do, quick push away to see, and then maybe within 30 seconds they'll wait, I didn't mean it, or try to get close again, and that kind of dynamic. It's solely for the purpose of testing. Clinging, of course, right? And that's often the one that can sometimes push people away. And we're going to talk about solutions and some commitments and different things. And remember, the course has like a ton of resources about this. Self-abandonment is a protest behavior. Like, I'm going to abandon myself totally to people please. So self-abandonment to people please is sort of one whole thing there. Rumination, attention seeking, either from in the relationship or outside of the relationship, is a common thing. Just get the ball rolling to think of like what protest behaviors come up for me. Trying to make somebody jealous. Emotional dumping can be a protest behavior when you're really trying to say, like, it can be in like a critical way. It won't be highly critical, like fierce with words in a way like fearful avoidance can be, but it can still be critical. And we always talk about how we criticize when we're afraid to communicate. It's so important to recognize that. That's like the implications of getting that right will save you the most amount of time and energy and effort in your life that would have otherwise been spent in negatively oriented conflict. The traditional simple example is, let's say I go, you never do the dishes. You know, I'm criticizing instead of being able to say, hey, I could really use some support. I'm feeling overwhelmed. Can you please take a turn to do the dishes? And what do you think is going to be heard and received better? Right? Somebody's going to block out you saying you never do the dishes. Somebody else is going to be like, oh, I hear that you need support and help as a partner. And it's gentle and it's forthcoming and it's honest, and like just tweaking your communication in that one area going to save you a lot of time. So take a moment, write out some of the different behaviors, and then we're going to go through solution, and then how do I commit to that solution so that I can actually program it in using repetition, which we know reprograms the subconscious mind. But let's just say we're referring specifically to the behavior of criticism. And then we go, okay, what's the solution? Oh, the solution is to communicate more vulnerably. Great. Now you have that idea. It's clear. But now what can we do about it? How can we make this our new normal? And so that's what we're going to fill out in part C there, in column C. What becomes my commitment to transform? So maybe your commitment to transform becomes, every time I feel like I'm going to criticize, I instead take a moment to myself, define what I need, and then practice communicating that. And if I find that I'm not getting it in the moment, I will definitely make sure I go back after and say, hey, I'm so sorry. I think I sounded critical a moment ago. What was really happening is I'm feeling overwhelmed and I needed support to do the dishes, and I actually am not communicating well, and that's my fault, and I could really use that support if and when you're ready. And so we will, and then between those two things, we're going to start getting it. If we don't do it in the moment, we practice doing it right after, and then we start seeing, okay, it's easier to do in the moment because I'm getting into the habit of identifying my needs in real time. So I hope you see so far, it's like, what is the protest behavior? We've identified earlier some of the big roots of them, so we have clarity, we see the full picture. And now, what is my solution to change? How can I commit to making that my new normal? What strategies can I use? Let's say clinging to somebody, because it's a huge protest behavior in the power struggle phase for anxious preoccupied. So why do we cling? We cling because we're afraid of abandonment, okay? So purchase behavior would be clinging. What's the solution? The solution could be I ask for reassurance when I feel afraid of being abandoned. A solution could be, and I talk about all the solutions as we go through that course if you ever want to go back and look, or if you've done it already and want to review. Solution could be as well, I work really hard on reprogramming my fear of abandonment. And I actually make sure that I'm communicating regularly, saying, hey, I feel afraid, and I'm doing that reprogramming work in the relationship to self. Another really important strategy will be to stop abandoning myself so I'm not always running on empty. And I stop abandoning myself by strengthening my self-identity and being clear about who I am and what I want in the 7 areas of life, and having active strategies to support each of the 7 areas of my life, good financial habits and goals, a career that I really enjoy or that I'm working on moving towards that I know I'll love, healthy relationships with friends and family, so as we strengthen ourselves and self-identity, we become less fearful of something going wrong in our one relationship, because this isn't the source of all of our needs being met. And then commitment to transform. So you can pick any one of those solutions, and then what you're going to do is you're really going to work to pattern those things in. So what can I do on a daily basis to make sure? Maybe I have a checklist for all 7 areas of my life, and I'm working on making sure I tend to each area in a small way with one thing per day to nurture each area of my life. Maybe I do reprogramming on the I am abandoned core wound for that 21 days, morning and evening. Maybe I, fill in the blanks from anything, right? But this is where I really want you to empower yourself to think of, like, from all the solutions mentioned in the course or all the solutions that I'm hearing from Thais now, what is going to be important to me to really transform? How can I make this a daily thing or a new normal? So hopefully that's super helpful for you guys.